The big men. Does size really matter? Early in my career as a healer of basketball players, I had the distinct pleasure of working with two very well-known centers. To protect the innocent, or perhaps not so innocent, I will change names. Both of these centers used to be NBA players. And now they were coaching a motley team in Asbury Park, New Jersey. Not only was the team motley, the whole scene was pretty motley. The folding chairs in the gymnasium were falling apart, and even though this was a minor league, there was something very sad about the setting. I don't remember a thing about the game, but the chairs still hurt my back when I think of them. Fortunately, the game ended, and we all made it back to the Comfort Inn where the boys were staying. The room was a typical Comfort Inn with 2 queen-size beds. Energetic, entrepreneurial Nick was on the phone the minute we hit the room. If he had had 3 arms and 3 ears, he probably would be making triple deals. I could tell that Chuck was a little uneasy with me. A lot of these big men are a little uneasy with me. They don't know what to expect. I personally find it humorous for a 6'9" to 7'1" giant intimidated by little old 5'1" me. Nick was conducting business with both hands and both ears. He said to Chuck, "You go first." Chuck said, "Who, me?" "Yeah, you." I asked Chuck how he thought I might be able to help him, and he told me he had severe digestive complaints. I positioned Chuck on the bed. This took some doing. These guys need to be diagonally on the bed, or else their heads or feet will fall off the edge of the bed. Nick encouraged Chuck to relax and trust me. After about 5 minutes, Chuck had totally relaxed and actually fell asleep. I continued to work on him, and from the other bed, I heard Nick interrupt his telephone conversation to say, "Chuck, you are snoring like an old mare." Chuck didn't move, nor did he acknowledge Nick. I just continued what I was doing and protected Chuck's head from falling off the edge of the bed. When I had completed my treatment with Chuck, I told Nick that I was ready for him. He completed his conversation and we discussed his needs. He had numerous complaints, but I was undaunted by his laundry list. He arranged himself on the bed in a similar manner as Chuck. Lying diagonally on the bed, his head was protected. I began the treatment, and within 5 minutes, Nick was also asleep. He too sounded like an old mare. I completed my treatment and took a step backwards to witness these 2 gentle giants. They were both sound asleep. My immediate impression was that of Gulliver's Travels. These boys both approached the 7-foot mark, and I, at 5'1", was wide awake and good to go. This absurd scene continued for the next 20 minutes. I was hesitant to disturb them. Eventually, Chuck stirred, and the spell was broken. Chuck and Nick stretched and made appropriate waking up sounds. Nick's laundry list of complaints had been resolved, but the jury was still out regarding Chuck. It was too soon to tell. Several weeks later, however, Chuck reported that he was alive and well and free of his problems. The moral of the story has to do with the age-old question, does size really matter? St. Martin's by the sea. The warm Caribbean Ocean of St. Martin's was deliciously inviting. The Flamingo Resort Hotel was my home for the next 9 days. I discovered the best spot for a dip. The sandy bottom was free of rocks, and I was lulled by the waves. My quiet was disturbed by 2 women who were noisily struggling with the rocky bottom. I took pity on them and beckoned for them to join me at the sandy spot. Rita waded over to me and immediately told me that her cat had died 2 days ago. On the same day, her boss had a heart attack. Her cat, who was given to her by her boss, was 17 years old. She worked in Washington, D.C., and even though she was born in Trinidad, she couldn't swim. I want to know why I was privy to this information within the first 5 seconds of meeting Rita. Maybe it is my silence or some emotional energy I emit. Rita convinced her still struggling friend to join us. The friend did not reveal her biochip, and I was hypnotized by Rita's non-stop litany. I was completely surprised when a large flotsam joined us. He was unusual-looking in a usual-looking way. He had a buzz cut, mirrored aviator sunglasses, and even though he was floating with some kind of flotation device that made him appear upright, he took up a lot of space in the ocean. Although he looked more like a bad highway patrol officer in a B-movie, he actually was a referee for a high school basketball team. He chatted with Rita and her friend. As fate would have it, they used to live very close to each other, and they agreed that the best place for chicken wings was the Friday Dutch Farmers Market. The mirrored aviator glasses used to get 30 wings, and he and his family ritualistically ate cold chicken wings on Friday nights. The image of a family of mirrored aviator glasses chowing down on cold chicken wings made me laugh, and, in deference to the flotsam, I turned my head to look into the soon-to-be setting sun. I soon left this trio to prepare for the evening festivities. I was looking forward to a sunset cruise. The advertisement promised that this was a relaxing educational cruise. The name of the boat was the Lambada. That should have been a clue, but I didn't get it. We all lined up with our laminated passes that said Lambada. Our instructions were to climb aboard and remove our shoes. After everyone was aboard, our captain announced that this was a fun ship. He introduced the crew, and Bobby, a spindly Asian, was our bartender. Bobby took his job seriously and constantly circulated with rum punch and beer. I was not at all particularly interested in cheap rum or beer. I found a quiet place and watched the sunset picture show. It was spectacular. The colors and shapes of the clouds were a moving panorama. After a time, I decided to move to the front of the boat where I could more easily feel the wind on my face. I sat next to Gail from Long Island. She was wearing white shorts and a t-shirt. Her white baseball cap held her blonde ponytail in place. This initially looked like a good move, and then the rum kicked in. Gail became very Long Island animated. She was loud, and her vowel sounds were very exaggerated. It was definitely not music to my ears. The brogue-like sounds coming from this slightly plastered, lively Scottish couple was refreshing, a sharp contrast to Gail. This plastered couple were slightly overweight and in their 60s. She wore a light green cover-up and sprawled on the deck. Her feet were spread apart, which meant that her private parts were available for all to view. Her head was nestled in her husband's crotch, and they laughed about nothing. It had a pleasant ring. Bobby, true to form, kept coming around with refills. The rum was flowing and the scene was getting old. I moved to the lower deck where introductions were no longer in order. A bizarre-looking woman in a nondescript orange muumuu and a cowboy hat was leaping around like a trained primate. She climbed on the seats, hopped to the dance floor, and just stared. The music was loud, and the song was House on Fire. I had never heard the song before, but apparently everyone else had. The boat seemed to be on fire, with everyone singing and jumping and swaying with raised arms. Periodically, a chorus of House on Fire was heard. It is times like this that I fully believe that I am from a different planet. The primate's dance partner was a large black woman who was also wearing a muumuu. She gyrated and hooted like a primate in heat. On a particularly animated song, the large black woman placed her drink in my hand. "Hold this." When she came to reclaim her drink, she said, "You are really laid back, aren't you?" I let her think what she wished, and with my eyes closed, I swayed to the music and imagined that the non-existent weed had taken over. This definitely was not the relaxing, educational sunset cruise I had imagined. This was a circus. The Middle Eastern woman with her burqa was being challenged by her husband. He danced seductively in front of her. His thick legs and torso gyrated like he was ready to take off. The burqa finally joined her husband, and they gyrated together. The dance floor was vibrating with activity. I continued to sit and, to the best of my ability, continued to simulate an herb-induced trance. After an hour and a half, our sunset cruise was most mercifully complete. We docked and claimed our shoes. I had had enough. I wanted to leave the island immediately. This was not pleasurable. This was a form of mental and physical torture. After growling internally for a while longer, I decided to return to a wine bar that I had previously passed. The guitar player was just setting up, and I sensed that he was a good musician. The wine list was respectable, and I ordered a Riesling and appreciated the quiet night. Perhaps I could make my peace with this island after all. At a nearby table, 4 gay men were engrossed in a chess game. It was refreshing to see such concentration. The perky blonde waitress who had served me joined the chess players. Franco, the guitar player, returned for his second set. He looked at me and said, "This song is for you." He played, "It is a wonderful night for a moonbeam." I was touched. There was hope. I enjoyed my wine and no longer needed to simulate an herb-induced trance. My trance was genuine. The wine mellowed me, the night air soothed me, and Franco's attention was a welcome diversion. I floated to my room that night. My faith in humanity was restored. My lesson was clear. Make intelligent choices, ask questions, and do read the small print. St. Patrick's Day at the Bar Harbor Club. Leading with his belly, a very undistinguished gentleman descended the steps into the Bar Harbor Club dining room. It was St. Patrick's Day, and the celebrants were in their full regalia. I will call this undistinguished gentleman Irving. He did a very curious thing before he actually began his descent into the room. He stood poised at the top of the stairs, and as he perused the room, he opened his jacket and placed his hands in his pockets. This action ensured that his large belly, covered by a knobby green sweater, would be in full view to even the most casual observer. Irving was not a typical celebrant. His rimless glasses and shiny head was in sharp contrast to most of the attendees. It is important to know that the Bar Harbor Club is an elite, high-rise condo conglomerate where the cost of a single unit could easily feed most of the starving children in South Africa. The very rich senior population had its own unique charm. Not only were huge quantities of alcohol consumed, but most seniors were regular medical marijuana users. Most of them had had work done. This includes outright plastic surgery, Botox, liposuction, and probably 10 other interventions that I had never heard of. The thing that was most notable about the overall nature of these celebrants was that they had no expression on their faces. They looked as if they were cartoon characters who had walked into a wall. They reminded me of the old Tom and Jerry cartoons in which an animated character was thrown across the room and completely flattened as the character fell to the floor. Apart from the flattened facial expressions, many of the body movements were robotic. Necks did not turn, hands moved with spastic motions. Rising from a chair was done in slow motion, with degrees of uprightness occurring as the seconds ticked by. I was seated with two friends. We had a lovely view of the room, and even though most of the band was Hispanic, they did a very passable rendition of Irish music. Fortunately, I was visually spared, as only one couple was swing dancing and two women were gyrating in a seductive manner. I tend to cringe when I see such performances. Fortunately, there was no attempt at the Irish jig or anything close to river dance. Thank God for small favors. The menu was very inviting. I decided to have the poached salmon, and my friends had a traditional corned beef and cabbage dinner. We ordered wine and settled in for some serious people watching. Out of my peripheral vision, I spotted a very strange hat worn by a very strange woman. She was petite, with white skin and dark hair. Her face, of course, was flattened, and perched on her head was a pillbox hat a la Jackie Kennedy. It had a spiraling plume which looked a little like a slinky toy unwinding. She seemed to have no trouble maintaining this unusual head covering, and since there was no wind, other than air conditioning in the room, it was a pretty safe bet that she would not be taking off. It was about this time that I noticed Irving meandering through the crowd. He was still leading with his belly. He stopped at the table where Miss Pillbox was seated. He apparently knew several of the celebrants. Most of them had some variation of green-wearing apparel. One of the chief offenders was a woman who was 30 pounds overweight and wearing a strapless bustier. Her large breasts were barely covered, but Irving didn't seem to mind. He actually appeared to be mesmerized by them. It looked as if Irving were having a conversation with those large breasts. Eye contact was distinctly made with them. There were two somewhat younger-looking women. At first I thought that they didn't fit in with this crowd, but alas, they just had a lot of good work done. The telltale for them was their inability to move without bending. They looked like performing mimes. They seemed to be duplicates of each other, so I imagine that they had the same plastic surgeon. They both had long, flowing, thinning hair and tight-fitting sweater dresses. I don't remember seeing any green on them. There was one woman who seemed to be genuinely enjoying the music. She was clapping her hands and created an intricate beat. She kept time with the music. With her fingers bent, she wrapped her palms together. Her graceful hands caught my eye. Her hair was dark and pulled back from her face. She was interesting and intelligent-looking, and I wondered how she wound up with this crowd. It was only when the band took a break, and I noticed that she was being led to the bathroom. Apparently she was blind, which accounted for her unaltered face and body. Since she couldn't see herself, there was no point in altering her looks. One could call this circular reasoning, and that would be accurate. However, that reasoning holds its own quirkiness. My dinner companions were platonic friends, but acted as if they were romantically involved. One reason for this ruse was to attract the attention of the former girlfriend of the non-present boyfriend. The former girlfriend, who was 85, was pawing her current boyfriend. They were an odd couple. She had had a lot of work done, and the boyfriend looked like he belonged in the cast of The Sopranos. He was definitely the gangster type. And, as it turned out, he not only looked like a gangster, he was a gangster. With his gold chains and swarthy good looks, he should have been called either Big or Little Johnny. He definitely needed a name that set him apart from the maddening crowd, and a Moish Cohen he was not. My friend pointed out that in addition to the many air kisses, there was an inordinate amount of feely, touchy behavior. This made no particular sense until I put two and two together and realized that I was observing many flower children of the 60s. Being a flower child myself, I was very familiar with touchy-feely behavior. I, however, did not see anyone looking deeply into the eyes of the touchy-feely recipient. This was probably due to poor eyesight. I guess times do change. I was pretty bizarre myself. For starters, I only had on a speck of green on a tastefully imported silk blouse. I definitely was not with the program. Apart from serious people watching, I wasn't too far from the bar and I was able to watch a Lakers game. I spotted Irving. He was still perusing the crowd and leading with his belly. He rapidly approached my table. His opening line was, "What is a good-looking woman like you doing in a place like this? Please spare me." That is almost as bad as "What is your sun sign?" When I indicated to Irving that I was watching the game, he unexpectedly and mercifully walked away. I continued to watch the game and the festivities. The game was exciting and finished with a very close fourth quarter. My friends were about ready to leave. More air kisses and good wishes were exchanged. What a delightful St. Patrick's Day celebration. Nameless. My passion for basketball has been a compelling force in my life. I applaud the athleticism, the skill, the dedication, the kindness, the personal style, and sensitivity of certain professional basketball players. My gift as a healer is really appreciated only by a small minority of players, yet I have had the pleasure of working with hundreds of professional athletes. I have had only one experience in which I have had to exercise white-knuckle restraint. The gentleman I will be discussing has been privy to my other stories and has experienced a fear that he would wind up in one of them. For that reason, I will be referring to him as Nameless. I had arranged to meet Nameless in an LA hotel room. That in itself seems seductive. May I explain that since I have traveled to many places to treat these giants, I most frequently treat them in hotel rooms. Nameless knocked lightly on my door. He was right on time. Nameless was one of the shorter players I have treated. He was only 6'5", and still he ducked as he entered the room. I ushered him into the room and pointed to a comfortable chair. "Have a seat. How are you?" The small talk centered on a mutual friend and other players. There was nothing notable about that exchange. Very professional chit-chat. After a few more minutes, I asked Nameless how he thought I could help him. He had an old neck and knee injury. I asked him to stand so that I could make an assessment of his body. After my assessment, I asked Nameless to have a seat again. Now, if you do not have experience with these gentle giants, you probably would be aghast at how long their limbs are. Seated in the chair, Nameless's knees extended well beyond the seat. It just made it easier for me to get the front and the back of his knees at the same time. This gentle giant seemed a little nervous. He didn't quite know what to expect. I told him it didn't get much more interesting than what he was experiencing now. In a few more minutes, I asked him to stand and test his knees. I forgot to tell him that he might be a little lightheaded from the treatment, and sure enough, as soon as the gentle giant stood up, he plopped right back down into the chair. The room was spinning for him, and so we waited for the initial experience of the room moving to pass. Nameless said, "What did you do to me?" I told him I was just using an energy to reduce the arthritic cells in his knees. "You are one powerful lady. What else can you do?" "Well, I intended to work on your neck." "You can just stay where you are. I will walk around to the back of the chair." We completed the session successfully, and Nameless had improved mobility. Nameless was feeling good and requested a massage. I told Nameless that I didn't do massage. He persisted and said he really needed one. He said he needed one just like someone might crave a piece of chocolate. I apologized again and said that I just didn't do massage. He said that he would have to go elsewhere, and I got alarmed. After a session, it is very important that the client just allow the energy to move where it is needed. A vigorous massage can be very disturbing to the energy fields. I said that if he absolutely insisted to please ask his masseuse to go very gently. He obviously was disappointed, but not only do I not do massage, I had a gig the next day, and I had to practice my flute. Nameless left, looking very dejected. I closed the door and assembled my flute and began to practice. Within 15 minutes, there was a knock on the door. Guess who? It was Nameless. He had called his regular masseuse, and she wasn't available. This was one desperate man. He looked at me with large, pleading brown eyes. I told him that I had a gig the next day and I had to practice. He had no idea that I was a musician. He asked if he could stay while I practiced. I told him I needed to practice without an audience. He wanted to know when he could come back for his massage. By this time I was worn down and told him to come back in an hour. I really needed to practice. I told him that I didn't have any massage oil. He said that that was no problem. He would get some while he was waiting for me to finish practicing. When Nameless returned, I had prepared the bed for his massage. I went into the bathroom while he disrobed and got under the sheets. I arranged the sheets so that he could be properly draped with minimum exposure. Nameless was not expecting this degree of professionalism. He was lying on his stomach with just one leg exposed. He said he was too hot with all of these sheets on top of him. I think I said too bad or something like that. I massaged each limb and was careful to expose only the area that I was massaging. I was seated on a chair facing him when I exposed his back and leaned over to massage him. He emitted a sexual groan. Oh, this was not good. This was not the response I wanted to deal with. Facetiously, I asked Nameless if he were in pain, and he said no, that he was in pleasure. He then placed his large, beautiful hands on my thighs, and that is when I had my white knuckle experience. Nameless, you will have to remove your hands from my thighs. I don't want to remove my hands from your thighs. By this time, he was slowly moving his fingers toward my groin. Nameless, you will have to immediately remove your hands. You are no fun. You are right. I am no fun, and I do not intend to be any fun. Oh. And besides, as soon as we are complete with this massage, I will be practicing again. You are what? You can't leave me like this. Wrong. I have my ethics and my priorities. Nameless was quiet. The room was still. I continued with the massage and asked Nameless to turn over on his back. He slowly turned over, and his erection formed a tent with the sheets that I had carefully, professionally used to drape him. Neither one of us said anything about this arrangement. The massage was complete, and the story is just about to end. I went back into the bathroom while Nameless dressed. When I returned to the bedroom, Nameless was seated in the chair. He was feeling no pain and vibrating very intensely. He looked at me and said that he felt great. He had no pain, and then he said something that was really very funny. He said that he had never played second fiddle to a flute. We both laughed, and I got a sisterly hug. He left with a smile on his face, and my practice session was sublime.